You are looking at a carrot that was pulled from the ground 6 months ago. It is still crisp, still sweet, still as firm as the day it was harvested, because an old-timer buried it in a wooden crate of damp sand in a forgotten corner of the barn. No refrigerator, no root cellar, no electricity, just sand and silence. And when you understand how they did it, you will never store a carrot in your fridge again. That's the lost art of root vegetable burial, a method that kept carrots, beets, and parsnips crisp from October to April, with no fridge, no freezer, and no root cellar, for centuries. It was simply how winter worked, and it still works today, on any property, with nothing more than a crate of damp sand. But once you understand what the sand is actually doing, you will realize your refrigerator has been failing you from the start. Because your refrigerator is a liar. It promises freshness, but delivers a slow dehydration chamber, pulling moisture from the walls of every carrot and beet until they're bendy and lifeless. The old-timers knew something that refrigerator engineers never solved. Root vegetables aren't dead when you pull them from the soil. They're still breathing, still metabolizing, and they demand a very specific kind of environment. Not cold and arid, but cool and moist. And there is one simple medium that delivers both, using nothing more than a wooden crate and a bucket of damp sand. This is not some rustic novelty. It is how entire communities survived the winter before electricity, before freezers, before the word root cellar got turned into a Pinterest aesthetic. In the 1940s, during wartime rationing, the British Ministry of Agriculture published pamphlets teaching every household how to build a vegetable clamp in the garden, because a nation that couldn't store its own carrots was a nation that would starve. They buried their beets, their parsnips, their turnips, and their potatoes in straw-lined pits and pulled them out months later as if they'd just been unearthed. This knowledge goes back further than that. Generations of Pennsylvania Dutch farmers, New England homesteaders, and Midwest pioneers bunkered their harvests in boxes of sand behind the wood stove, in the barn, in a corner of the kitchen where the temperature never rose above 40 degrees. They understood that sand, slightly damp but never wet, regulates humidity with almost magical precision. It holds enough moisture to keep roots turgid and crisp, but not enough to encourage rot. It breathes, it insulates, it puts the vegetables into a kind of suspended animation. And the moment you taste a carrot pulled from sand in February, as sweet as the day it was harvested, you will never trust a refrigerator again. But this method nearly vanished as soon as suburban America could buy a Frigidaire with a crisper drawer. The crate of sand was shoved into the shed and forgotten. The knowledge shrank to a handful of old farmers and survivalists, and I almost wrote this off as a charming history lesson until I met a man in upstate New York who showed me a buried garbage can packed with sand, straw, and 60 pounds of carrots that had been sitting underground since October. He pulled one out, knocked off the sand, and bit into it. The snap echoed off his garage wall. That was the moment I knew I had to build one myself. And what happened next revealed a critical mistake that most people make with this method. A mistake that can turn a crate of perfect carrots into a box of mold within a week. I'll show you exactly what it is after you see how a clamp works. A vegetable clamp is nothing more than a blanket of earth. You dig a shallow depression in the garden, maybe 4 inches deep, 3 feet across. Line it with a thick mattress of straw. Pile your root vegetables into a cone. Wrap them in another layer of straw. Then shovel the excavated soil back over the whole thing until it looks like a miniature burial mound. You leave a tuft of straw poking out the top for ventilation, and you dig a shallow drainage ditch around the perimeter. so winter rain doesn't pool inside. That is a clamp. It has no walls, no door, no electricity. It uses the planet's own insulation. The temperature down there, beneath that mound, stays right around 35 degrees. The straw breathes. The roots, nestled together in the dark, stay firm and dormant. The British Ministry of Agriculture taught this to millions of families. During World War II, their pamphlets, printed on cheap wartime paper, showed a housewife in an apron bending over a garden clamp with the caption, "Every home a storehouse." And it worked. A nation under rationing kept its carrots, turnips, and beets fresh from autumn until the first lettuce of spring without a single refrigerator. You can still find those pamphlets today in online archives. I read one from 1942 that said the clamp method was so effective that even if the top froze solid during a hard frost, the center would remain untouched. But the clamp has a weakness. It is outside. It is vulnerable to the full brute force of winter. For carrots, which are far more delicate than potatoes, there is a better way. The old-timers knew it. The sandbox method. A simple wooden crate, a bag of damp sand, and a spot in the barn where the temperature lives between 32 and 40 degrees. And when you understand what the sand is actually doing, you will realize how close I came to ruining my entire first harvest. Most people think of sand as something that dries things out. It's the desert. It's arid. It's what you dump on ice to melt it. But slightly damp sand is one of the most elegant humidity regulations nature ever designed. Tiny capillaries between the grains pull excess moisture away from the vegetables and hold it in suspension. When the air starts to dry, the sand releases that moisture back. It is a passive buffer, a zero-energy humidifier that never needs a cord or a dial. The trick is the word damp, not wet, damp. And I learned that distinction the hard way. The first autumn I tried this, I read a faded garden column that said, "Pack them in moist sand." I filled a wooden crate with beach sand straight from the shore, soaked it with a hose until water pooled at the bottom, and layered in my freshly scrubbed carrots. I sealed the lid. 2 weeks later, I opened it to a science experiment. White mold grew like cotton wool up the sides. The carrots had gone slimy and soft. I had done everything wrong. I had used beach sand, which is full of salt and sharp-edged fragments that abrade the skin. I had washed the carrots, stripping away their natural protective coating and introducing surface moisture they had no way to defend against. And I had drowned the sand. The water content was so high that instead of regulating humidity, the sand became a sponge box of rot. What the old-timers understood, what every Pennsylvania Dutch farmer knew by instinct, is that you need play sand. The same fine, washed, screened sand sold for children's sandboxes. It is chemically inert, uniformly grained, and free of the pathogens and salts that live in yard dirt. You dampen it in a bucket, not with a hose. You add water in small increments and mix until the sand holds its shape. When you squeeze it in your fist, but releases no free water, it should feel like a wrung-out sponge. Then you take your carrots, unwashed, with the leafy tops trimmed to half an inch and the roots left to cure in open air for a day or two so their skins toughen, and you nestle them into that crate, one layer of carrots, one layer of carrots, one layer of sand, making sure no two roots touch. You cap it with a final thick blanket of sand, and you place the crate in a cool corner. That's it. The carrots go dormant. Their cells stop losing water. The sand breathes for them. 6 months later, you pull one out, brush it off, and bite into it. The snap echoes. The sweetness is still there, locked in place by nothing more than silica and moisture. The man I met in upstate New York showed me the next evolution of this method. He didn't use a crate. He used a buried metal garbage can. He dug a hole 3 feet deep in a dry corner of his yard, dropped in the can, layered it with straw and damp sand, and 60 pounds of beets and carrots, covered the lid with a tarp, and shoveled the dirt back over the top. The temperature down there, at that depth, never dipped below 32 degrees. The earth itself became the refrigerator. He pulled a carrot for me in the middle of March. It snapped like a fresh-picked one, and the sand still smelled like wet earth after a spring rain. That buried bin method is what I use now. It works for beets, rutabagas, parsnips, turnips, even winter radishes. But there is one root crop you cannot trust to this system. If you put it in the same sand as your carrots, it will contaminate everything within days. I learned that the hard way too. And when you realize which vegetable it is, and why the refrigerator industry never warned you about any of this, you will understand exactly what was quietly taken from the American kitchen the moment everyone bought a Frigidaire. That vegetable is the potato, and that is exactly the kind of detail the refrigerator industry spent 70 years making sure you forgot. Potatoes and carrots are enemies. Potatoes release moisture and ethylene gas as they sit, accelerating decay in anything nearby. Put them in the same crate of sand as your carrots, and within days that sand becomes a vector. The moisture spikes, fungal spores that were lying dormant in the soil wake up, and the carrots turn to liquid. The old-timers understood this so deeply. They never even wrote it down. They stored their potatoes in separate clamps in burlap sacks hung in the root cellar. In a dark corner of the barn, carrots got the sand crate, beets got their own. Each crop had its own microclimate, its own humidity requirement, its own enemy list. And then the Frigidaire arrived and told America that one dial could do it all. The year was 1953. Frigidaire, a division of General Motors, launched a national advertising campaign they called the Food Spoilage Prevention Program. It blanketed women's magazines, newspapers, and the new television commercials. The ads showed smiling housewives pulling perfectly crisp vegetables from gleaming white crisper drawers. The subtext was ruthless. If you still buried your food in the ground like a farmer, you were primitive, unsanitary, dangerous. The USDA, at the time, heavily partnered with appliance manufacturers on food safety standards, issued new home storage guidelines that omitted burial methods entirely. Sandboxing disappeared from the pamphlets. The knowledge of how to keep a carrot crisp for 8 months without electricity shrank to a handful of farm journals. Nobody in the suburbs ever read, and the grocery store chains loved it, because the moment Americans forgot how to store their own food, they had no choice but to buy it week after week. From a refrigerated produce aisle, the carrot industry shifted with them. Seed catalogs stopped carrying the old storage varieties, Danvers, Guérande, Oxheart, and replaced them with thin-skinned hybrids bred for trucking, not for dormancy. Try burying a modern supermarket carrot in sand. Its skin has been bred so thin, so rushed through its life cycle, that it will soften in less than a month. The genetic memory of overwintering has been erased from its cells. You are now buying a carrot designed to fail in your kitchen unless you eat it immediately. All of this was deliberate, not a conspiracy of men in a smoky room, but a system of incentives that rewarded disposability, that punished self-reliance, that turned a centuries-old skill into a lost art. But the Amish never participated, and in a farmhouse outside Lancaster County, a man named Silas Zook still buries his carrots exactly the way his grandfather did in 1904. When I told him about the beach sand and the washed carrots and the potatoes I had ruined, he looked at me with the same quiet patience I have come to recognize from every old farmer who knows something the world has forgotten. He walked me to the back of his mule barn, pointed to a plastic garbage can, buried flush with the earth, and pulled off the lid. Inside was sand, and carrots, and beets, and a smell that was not rot, but wet earth after rain. He pulled one out, knocked it against the can, and ate it. I asked him the secret. He said 3 words. 2 of them I have already told you. The third is what makes the whole thing fail if you skip it. And when Silas told me what it was, I realized that every YouTube tutorial I had watched had gotten it wrong. He pointed to the lid of the buried can. Never open it until you are ready to eat. That was the secret. Not a single word, but an instruction that broke every habit I had brought from the modern kitchen. Every YouTube tutorial I had watched showed the gardener lifting the lid for the camera, pulling a carrot, wiping off the sand, making a big show of the crunch. And every time that lid came off, the system lost its grip. Warm air rushed in, moisture condensed on the cold sand. Within hours, those delicate micro-droplets pooled against the carrot skins, and the rot clock started ticking. A sandbox is not a refrigerator. You can browse. It is a sleeping organism. The carrots enter a kind of suspended respiration, their cells slow to near zero. The sand holds the humidity at 90%, the temperature at 35 degrees, and the darkness absolute. Disturb any one of those legs, and the whole thing stumbles. That is why Silas Zook opens his buried bin exactly once a week, on the same day, to pull only what his family will eat in the next 7 days. He reseals it and walks away. He told me his grandfather could fill a crate in October and not open it until March, and everything inside would still be as crisp as the morning it was dug. I believed him, but I still doubted. Until the end of that winter, when I pulled my own first carrot from a garbage can in the backyard. The sand was cold and clean. The carrot came out with a soft exhale, as if it had been snoozing underground. I brushed it off with my thumb and broke it in half. The snap carried through the garage, and then I tasted it. It was sweeter than the day I harvested it, and I finally understood why. Inside the sand, at that precise temperature, the carrot was not just surviving, it was improving. The starches in the root were slowly converting to natural sugars, a process called cold sweetening that every root vegetable performs when the soil stays just above freezing. Your refrigerator, with its dry 37-degree air, shuts that process off before it can begin, because the carrot has already started to wilt. The sand, by holding moisture, lets the conversion run for months. The carrot that comes out in February is chemically superior to the one that went in. That is not folklore, that is biochemistry. And once you know it, the produce aisle becomes a monument to what was lost. You will look at a bag of supermarket carrots, sprayed with misters every 10 minutes to hide their limpness, and you will see a system that broke a 300-year-old chain of knowledge and replaced it with plastic. But here is the part that should give you hope. You do not need a farm. You do not need a root cellar. You need a 5-gallon bucket of play sand, a wooden crate, and a corner of the garage that stays cool. You need to stop washing your vegetables and start curing them. You need to keep potatoes on the other side of the building. And you need the discipline of an Amish farmer who will not lift that lid until it is time for dinner. The buried bin, the sandbox, the garden clamp. All 3 methods work on a regular property with no electricity. These were not rough survival tricks. They were elegant, passive systems that worked with biology, not against it. A wooden crate of damp sand is a machine with zero moving parts that outperforms $1,000 refrigerator in the one metric that matters: real flavor. The old timers knew it. The Amish never forgot. And, for a few decades, the rest of us were trained to see the ground as dirty and the kitchen appliance as clean. That training cost us more than just fresh carrots. It cost us the memory that we could do this ourselves. If this kind of content makes sense to you, if you feel that something valuable was quietly taken from the American kitchen and you want it back, then there is a special offer waiting for you through the link in the first pinned comment. That offer is for people who believe that real knowledge belongs in hands, not just archives. Hit subscribe, drop a comment with the one crop you'd store first, and I'll see you in the next one.